Добрый вечер, дорогие друзья. Мы очень рады, что вы добрались сегодня к нам. У нас сегодня такой своеобразный постскриптум выставки «Грядущий мир. Экология как новая политика». Мы очень рады, что
Good evening, dear friends,
не
and thank you
получилось
very
это
much for
во время
coming
работы
here.
выставки, но тем
So
не
what
менее
we
до
have
нас
today is a kind of a
доехал
postscriptum to our exhibition,
долгожданный Тимоти Мортон,
Ecology
человек,
as the New
который был одним
Politics.
из очень
We are
важных
very happy to see
мыслителей
Timothy Morton
для
here
нас
with
с
us. He
Снежаной, когда
finally
мы готовили
managed to
эту
arrive. He was
выставку.
one of the influential
И мы
thinkers for
рады,
us and Snezhana
что
while we
к
were getting
выставке
the
вышла
exhibition ready. And
первая на
we are
русском
very
языке
happy to
книга «Быть
say that
экологичным».
his first,
И
the
у
first
вас есть
ever Russian
возможность
translation of his book has been
задать ему
published
какие-то
in the
вопросы, которые,
framework
может
of
быть, у вас
our
накопились,
exhibition
поэтому
project.
мы вас
And
призываем
today you're welcome to
в
ask
ходе
the
лекции
questions
тоже
you have.
подумать
So
о том,
please
что
think about the
спросить.
possible questions
Снеж, добавь.
during the talk, and then we'll have a Q&A session.
Два слов.
Just a couple of
Я
words.
хотела
Just a couple of words,
попросить, если вы
really. I
еще не
wanted to
взяли,
ask you
будет
to take
по-английски
headsets
лекция.
for simultaneous
Он
translation if
обещал
you need
читать очень
them.
медленно.
But Timothy promised to
И
read really
также
slowly.
попросил
So,
готовить вопросы.
and
Наверное,
yet,
сейчас самый
again,
страшный в
please
этом
get ready with the
вопросе. Он очень
questions.
любит как раз этот
Tim
момент.
really loves
И
questions from the
хотела
audience.
поблагодарить
And I wanted to
компанию
say
Сибур за
thank you
поддержку
to
лекции.
Seabury Company
И все,
for
приступим.
supporting us.
Timothy,
Let's
Snezhana.
start.
The floor is yours.
Hello, my name's Tim, and I just spilt my water all over my sleeve. Thank you for laughing. I think I might. So there's going to be a Q&A thing, and it's going to be quite long. And so, please feel free to think of a question. And this is my lab. If I didn't do this, I couldn't think ideas because I'm a bit stupid. Plus, thank you for almost laughing. And I'm a bit of a philosopher means clown, right? Like Socrates is also always saying, I'm a clown. And no one's believing him. It's like there was this 70s detective show in the USA. I live in Houston, in Texas, and Columbo, and he was always messing with people, like asking them endless questions, and just kind of like, in the end, whoever he was talking to would get so irritated. He'd go, "Oh, yeah, I did the murder," And lots of people think Socrates is like that, right? Like he's always asking questions to mess with people's head, and then they admit that they're wrong. But maybe he's actually saying, hello, I really am a clown, like I am. Like there's this poem by Stevie Smith, and she's written this poem, it's called Not Waving But Drowning. And in the poem, she's like, hello, I'm drowning, can anybody see? Like I feel like a little bit that all the time. And so clowns need people to work with, right? So I'm very honored and touched that you would have invited me here. And thank you so much, guys, for having me. I know it's so lovely of you. So this is a lecture, so they say, and it's called Putting the Ecology Back in Economy. And it's by Tim Morton, I see here. And I'm supposed to read it. And I am that person. Okay, so extreme right-wing forms of nationalism are on the rise. But this is to do with ecology, not just with economics. The risk of fascist reactions to the ecological circumstances of today is evident because as well as a fragile economy, humans around Earth are experiencing a fragile biosphere to a large extent for the same reasons. The numerous fascisms of today have one benefit. They allow us to reverse engineer very clearly the logic, ethics, and politics of accepting that ecology and economy go together. In this lecture, I'm going to outline what this might look like. And, so I don't do the how stuff, like scientists and politicians should do the how stuff, right? But I know what it feels like, so like I use my feelings as my lab, basically, like feelings are from the future, right? Like feelings are kind of like thoughts that you haven't had yet, like they're too complicated or painful for you to think them yet. And like ideas, like this word hyperobject, I invented this word, that's just like the receipt that comes out of the cash register at the end, so like words are from the past and concepts are from the past and feelings are from the future. So like I can probably describe what it's going to feel like when we're on the right track. Let's see how I do. I'm going to start with a line from Mary Wollstonecraft. She's the mother of Mary Shelley, you know, the person who wrote Frankenstein. She's the wife of William Godwin, this anarchist guy. I'm a scholar of the Romantic period English literature, actually, is what I am. You know, when people say philosopher, I have this horrible imposter syndrome, like I'm faking it, you know, and like my justification is like, maybe if you don't feel like a fake, maybe you could be very like, because you know everybody really knows that philosopher means mansplainer, you know, and like thank you for almost laughing, and like I'm doing this thing way late and it's after the exhibition and everything. It's like, and now Timothy Morton will explain everything to you, and it just like, Jesus. Thank you for really laughing at that. That's a good. So I'm going to start with a line from Mary Wollstonecraft, and it's at the front of this really austerely titled book called Original Stories from Real Life. They were into sort of science and stuff, yeah. And I'll just leave it hanging in the air. Look what a fine morning it is. Insects, birds, and animals are all enjoying existence. This is no fun for kids, yeah? Economics isn't about dollars and interest rates. Dollars and interest rates aren't about dollars and interest rates. All that stuff is reified capitalist theology, aka Economics 101, in a non-communist universities. Economics is how you organize your enjoyment, how you organize how stuff flows around in your house, your home, your world, all the shit that you've got going on. There's another page, I don't have to do that. And ecology is how the house, the home, the world that you've got going works, the logic of it. Economics and ecology are intertwined etymologically, logically, socially, everything. So the question is, do these things pertain only to human beings? Do you have cockroaches and rats in or around your home? I've got all of these because I live in Houston. There's all these critters. So I've got like lizards, and I have a lizard. I have a bearded dragon called Nicodemus, and I have this cat. Is he a cat? He's probably more like a lemur than a cat. He's called Oliver. He's very intelligent. He's a bit frightening, you know. When he gets happy, he sort of spreads his hands like this. Oh my God, no. You've got hands, dude. Do you look after a cat, and is it your house the cat lives in? Since I leave the house a lot more than my cat, in many ways it's the cat's house more than mine. This is sort of related to how, when I became a dad, I had that, this is not my beautiful house feeling, you know, like David Byrne, Talking Heads, Once in a Lifetime. This is not my beautiful house. I had that feeling very quickly as Claire began to make it very clear that it was her house, not mine. Psychologically, that's very true, isn't it? Your parents' house that you grew up in was much more yours than theirs. It was the first world you lived in. They just happened to rent or buy or whatever another living space in a series. And related to this question, another question of pleasure. If we don't like the theology of dollars and structural unemployment and having to work to live and all that stuff, if we think we're a little bit more left-wing or whatever, do we think it would be a good idea to include cockroaches and cats in the revolutionary or whatever transformational projects we have going on to transmogrify our homes, our worlds, into things that are more pleasurable for the beings who have stuff going on, like trying to find out where the rats really live. In my cat's case, my friend Graham improvises this stuff from index cards. I can't believe he does it. I have to have this thing, like a third rail, like to hold on to so I can deviate from it. Or in my cat's case, or trying to write a lecture when you're feeling really depressed about ecological politics and mass extinction in my case, etc. From a utilitarian point of view, which I find deeply problematic, but whatever, let's use it, because it's a pretty default thing in our world, just existing is a form of pleasure. So if there are more revolutionary beings like hedgehogs with little Che Guevara caps and stuff, that means more pleasure. So involving more life forms in revolutionary struggles would be better. Thanks very much for listening. My name is Tim Morton, and if you have any questions, I'll be available in the break. Thank you slightly, almost very good. Yay! Shortest talk ever. There ought to be more pleasure in the world for more beings. If you look around you, I'm sure you'll notice this is the case. Exxon and Monsanto and Jeff Bezos can't be, the Amazon guy, can't be having all the fun. So it follows that I'm one of those people who thinks that what's wrong with the dominant economic system in our home, world, whatever, aka capitalism, obviously, and the consumerism that's like the way we enjoy it, is that it doesn't provide enough pleasure. The problem, again, is not that it's too much pleasure, it's that it's nowhere near enough. Insects existing, that's nice for them, and it's nice for us. And currently, they're going extinct at a much faster rate than reptiles, birds, and mammals. And while we're on the subject, we are, if you don't know already, somewhere in the midst of the 6th mass extinction event on this planet. I can't really say that, I'm pretending to be brave, because when I actually think about what that is, I probably would cry or just go in the fetal position and, oh my God. So I'm just I'm saying these words, but I don't know what they mean exactly right now. But there's been 5 mass extinctions on this planet so far. The one that wiped out the dinosaurs was caused by the asteroid, And then there was the one before that was called the End Permian extinction, and it wiped out 96% of life forms on this planet, and that was a global warming one. Mass extinction event on this planet, a euphemism for which is global warming. A euphemism for global warming being climate change. So there was this Reagan appointee, he was called David Frum, and he kept on going on about, why don't the scientists call it climate change? That's more accurate. And they all bought into it, I don't know if you know this, but it's just been shown that the science was skewed. Facts are just interpretations of data, right? And scientists are human beings, and they're trying to be impressive and stuff. And so they interpreted the data much, much more conservatively with a small c than it should be. And so all of a sudden, all the stuff that's happening is a big shock, because the scientists were themselves trying to appeal to people who didn't like the idea of it or didn't want to do anything about it. And so, unfortunately, the science itself is skewed, and it's just oh my God. Great, fantastic, knowledge is socially constructed. Yay, we're all going to die. So when you hear the phrase climate change, I want to swap it out in your head with the phrase mass extinction, which is the most accurate description. The 5th mass extinction, which wiped the dinosaurs, was caused by an asteroid. This time, we are the asteroid. The 4th mass extinction was caused by global warming, like I was saying, a huge release of methane, and it wiped all but 4% of life forms off of the planet. The asteroid wiped all but 25%. The 4th one, the End Permian extinction, the global warming one, took about 40,000 years. The 6th one might take a few hundred. What happens when a 40,000 years worth of extinction is compressed into a few hundred years? Defibrillators are available in the library. Make your way to the exit in an orderly fashion. I'm Tim Morton. Thank you very much for listening. Again. Thank you for not clapping. So as you can imagine, as an ecological philosopher, whatever that is, when I hear the word philosopher talking of euphemisms, I swap it out with the phrase absurd clown. As an ecological philosopher, I'm really keen on figuring out a way for us to think that will stop us from being an extinction force, a physical force, on a planetary scale, as my pal Dipesh Chakrabarty says. Because something like Marxism or socialism or whatever isn't nice for humans, and socialism without any life forms at all, well, you do the math. I'm not quite ready to curl up in the fetal position or just pour cynical reason over everyone, because then I'm contributing to the problem, actually. So I've got to keep kind of doing it. So is this stuff nice and ecological already, so that we can just say what it says on the whole already and get on with it? Let's be absolutely honest about it. No, it isn't. Not at all. Take Karl Marx. Marxism is deeply anthropocentric. Loads of Marxists will disagree with me, just like loads of Christians like to point out that all kinds of stuff was already in Christianity, or Jesus already said stuff about it. That's religion. So sorry, Marxism is anthropocentric. Just consider the popular idea that humans alone create their environment, which comes from chapter 15 of book 1 of Capital, the thing about the worst of architects always being better than the best of bees. Because architects imagine and act while bees just execute and behave. It's in there. The act-behave binary is profoundly anthropocentric. Have these people ever seen an ant? Have these people ever seen a tree? You wouldn't believe how many times on the radio Slavoj Žižek comes on and he's like, the thing about human beings is they create their own environment. It's like, but have you ever actually seen a bird's nest? You know, it's just like really clear. So Marxism only works when you include non-human beings. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that not that you can put a nice green sticker on the existing stuff. I'm saying it only works when it includes non-human beings. And that's because of the idea of what's called species being, aka what we are or who we are, depending on how you look at it and how you think your world, how you think the word what and the word who, which work a bit like those words behave and act, respectively. And this idea of species being depends upon an idea of species, so we need to talk about it. And when I say we, I mean us lot in this room, and more generally, the entity that I call humankind, which last time we checked, which was about 1750, was a white man. It's very shaming and embarrassing to be one of these people in one of these things right now, saying this stuff, but, you know, whatever. So this entity needs a serious rethink. It's a real entity. It's a geophysical force on a planetary scale, but it can't mean white man. We can't just get rid of the idea of it. We are doing this to the planet, not dolphins, and we have fingers that can operate the keyboards that can turn off the oil and end Monsanto, so we'd better figure out who we are. So it turns out that Marx was a huge fan of Darwin, so much so that he sent Darwin Volume 1 of Capital along with a fan letter. And why? Because Darwin destroyed teleology. Evolution is random at every point. That's the Darwinian innovation. Like, everyone knew that there was this thing called evolution before Darwin, but what Darwin showed was that it was random, you know, and that's still like a really huge issue, you know, because like so many biologists, at least the previous generation to now, they're getting better, were always about like the functionality of the adaptation, but adapt is like, it doesn't mean very much. Like, you know, like if you see a nature show and they look and you see this duck and it's like, look at the duck with its sort of webbed feet, perfectly adapted for swimming through the water. Well, it's like, have you ever seen, in English it's called a moorhen or a coot. It's like a bird with like 3 little toes like that. They're not webbed, and it's also a water bird. Therefore, evolution doesn't care about, you know, having webbed feet for swimming. It doesn't care, you know. And then, you know, I was in this film called Living in the Future's Past with Jeff Bridges. It was really odd to have the dude saying Tim stuff in the film. It was just really mad. And they brought me in because he realized that actually all these scientists were saying stuff that wasn't quite right. So I'm doing like fix-it stuff on everything. And there's this one bit that I really wanted them to cut out, but it's still in there. Are you listening, Susan? And like, somewhere Jeff says something like, sexual display is so that you can attract a member of the opposite sex. And it's just like, well, just think about the first ever beetle that had an iridescent wing case. That was just this random thing. And there was probably like all these beetlist beetles, like, oh my God, look at that beetle there. And then think about the first like female beetle to be attracted to that. That was just like random, like more non-purposive than Immanuel Kant says beauty is, you know? And, you know, there's a very simple demonstration of why the idea that sexual display is for attracting a mate of the opposite sex is wrong. Like, can you see gay people? Yes, therefore evolution doesn't care about sexual display, blah, 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 right? It's obvious. Where was I? Oh, yeah. And teleology is what things are in Aristotle, who bankrolled Alexander the Great intellectually by arguing stuff like Greeks are for enslaving barbarians and non-Greeks are for being enslaved. So you can see why Marx didn't like teleology. But then you get a bit puzzled by why he uses so much Hegel, which I'm going to argue, at least a certain aspect of Hegel, I'm going to argue is the bug. You know, there's a bug in Marxism. Like maybe like that's not a non-human being, that's a software problem, right? The teleology aspect, the fact that the dialectical slinky somehow goes upstairs all by itself. So there are these toys called slinkies, and they're like spirals of metal, and they kind of look like they're walking down the stairs, and you've never seen one going up the stairs, right? And that's the Hegel idea, that they can go up the stairs. I love this flopping idea, that's awesome. But the up the stairs bit is a bit, who's ever seen that happen, yeah? But we can just rest for the moment on the idea that Marx is at least strongly in favor of destroying teleology, which in the 19th century was the philosophical equivalent of imperialism. Western white men have history, others don't, so they desperately need it to have imposed on them, and so on. And humans are better than non-humans because they are progress from non-humans. It's weird, I don't get it. Marx explicitly says that he loves Darwin because Darwin blows up teleology, then he goes and uses this Hegel stuff. Unfortunately, the very idea of communism in Marx is teleological. It's progress from capitalism, which is progress from feudalism. How can you think it without that? Is it even possible? Yes, it is. Thanks for coming again. I'll be in the coffee break. This goes on. So how do you're not laughing as much, which is awesome. This is great for my ego. Thank you. So how do you suck the teleology out? You can go the utilitarian, crude, materialist way, which is, I suppose, the legacy of a certain kind of Anglo-American or analytical philosophy. Analytical philosophy, like the sort of, if you don't agree with me, you must be talking nonsense. Those people, yeah? Like really, really clever people that I'm not. And you can argue that humans don't act either. Humans also behave. Everything is a machine. That doesn't sound right. Don't like the Deleuze and Guattari as well, right? I used to love Deleuze and Guattari. Really a lot. And then my brother got schizophrenia, and I just couldn't read them anymore. I just couldn't do it. Everything is a machine. That doesn't sound right. It means everything is equally manipulable stuff, and even if there's no manipulator, because we've already gotten rid of teleology, there's still a smell of manipulation and teleology around, if you see what I mean. We're still framing things along the lines of a subject versus everything else, the Kantian thing, which derives from, while claiming to depart radically from, the idea of some kind of operator or manipulator or mind versus some kind of everything else, aka extensional whatever that is, aka Cartesian dualism, which derives from, blimey, the sentence goes on forever, which derives from, while claiming to depart radically from Neoplatonic Christian ideas of soul versus body, from which we ultimately derive all these theories of act versus behave, aka humans versus non-humans. And so part of the mission here is like how to sharpen the idea of passive and how to soften the idea of active a little bit, and like how to see that they're kind of like almost the same thing. Because I think this act versus behave or active versus passive really kind of it's like a big Neoplatonic Christianity bug thing. Doesn't really work, That sounds bad. Marx himself didn't get along with what he called metaphysical materialism. Everything is a machine, for a good reason. We need to find a way to claim that everything isn't a machine, which means that everything is a person. And I understand there's an issue here in the translation. So when I say person, you're going to hear the word subject, and it's probably the best we can do, so that's totally fine, and I don't mind. But kind of like, it's not exactly that, because in a funny way, usually this word subject only pertains to human beings, and in particular, white male ones mostly, right? We need to find a way to claim that everything isn't a machine, which means that everything is a person in some sense, without any distinction of person and machine, subject and object, act and behave, which is going to be tricky because, as should be very clear, the way we say person means definitely not a manipulable machine that just behaves, and that therefore has the right to manipulate non-people. That's the trouble with the concept of rights. It can only work locally, not at the level of the biosphere as a whole. Rights is based on property, which is based on the idea that whatever property is, you can destroy it if you want. If nothing can be property because everything is a person, then nothing can have rights. I think the way to go is to make the concept person really, really cheap rather than super expensive. The US lawyers, this is for real, like there are these lawyers in New York State, and they're trying to prove that a chimpanzee is a person so that a certain chimp can be liberated from a certain zoo, and they have to put up with the moving goalposts of the judge, who can go at every point in their argument, well, that's cool, but the idea of person is much more expensive than that. Bring me some more expensive evidence that this chimp is a person. You can do loads of science and prove that chimps can self-reflect or have a self-concept or whatever you think person implies. And there is a bunch of it, you know, like rats experience regret and ants look around when they go up little ladders and, you know, bees have mental maps of where they are and all that stuff, right? Or you can do the dirty clown philosophy thing and go, is the judge a person? Does the judge have a self-concept? Prove it. Are you imagining right now rather than just behaving? Maybe you're an algorithm designed to claim that it is a person. This phenomenology of person, which is basically paranoia, provides a way towards a clue as to how to think person in a non-anthropocentric way, actually. Because if paranoia that you might not be a person constitutes being a person as such, in a way that you can't really delete the paranoia without some kind of essentialism or teleology, it means that paranoia is the default 0 degree, or whatever you like to say, of empathy. The more paranoid I am about you being a potential android, the more interested in you I am. You don't need to get rid of the paranoia. In fact, you mustn't get rid of it. That's basically what you learn from Turing's essay on artificial intelligence. Person means, very cheaply, not a non-person, right? Like, I can't tell the difference between the answers coming out of this door and the answers coming out of that door, because you've got like a computer program there and there's a human being there, and they're both feeding me answers on paper, and I can't tell the difference, so that one might as well be a person. That means you're not a non-person, right? You've just made it super cheap. And in a performative way that constitutes the kind of pretense that Lacan memorably talks about when he says, and this is my favorite line, I like riffs, you know, like I like bits of pop music, and I like bits that philosophers say, you know, I don't usually like the whole lot of it, yeah? I like the sort of micro Hegel. The macro Hegel's not great, but I like the micro, yeah? So this is the Lacan. This is so great. What constitutes pretense is that, in the end, you don't know whether it's pretense or not. Being a person is a kind of behavior that might be mistaken for action all the way down, if you want to put it like that. The other Aristotelian bad thing is that the essence of a thing is not only its telos, but its form, its morphe. But humans include all kinds of things that aren't human. They evolved from non-humans by definition, so they contain all kinds of non-human components. Lungs are from swim bladders, and there's nothing teleological in a swim bladder that makes it into a proto-lung. It just happened that some fish someday was able to breathe for a few seconds out of water without dying, which is what can happen if you're not dead, because it reproduced. Which, by the way, is only and simply what survival of the fittest actually means, when not in its capitalist social Darwinist concept, aka it's being used in the origin of species. The kin of that gasping fish were able to do it so as well, so eventually amphibians showed up. And in that moment, of course, we have little crustaceans in our eyelashes, we have bacterial microbiome and so on. And while we're on the subject, I've got this lizard, he's called Nicodemus, and he's a bearded dragon. They come from Western Australia. And from this lizard, so Björk's best friend's son gave this lizard to me because they couldn't take him back to Iceland, yeah? And you know the thing about lizards, like when you watch the nature show and David Attenborough is all like, you know, reptiles ruled the earth. There's this whole kind of Roman emperor thing going on about reptiles, yeah? Like mammals are the medieval ones, and then the primates are like the modern ones or whatever. And it's rubbish. You know, lizards are rubbish. I'm actually writing a chapter in this book I'm doing now called Lizards Are Rubbish. It's chapter 1. Like when you pick up a lizard, it's just a baggie. You know, it's just like a little plastic bag, and its internal organs are like smaller little plastic bags. They're rubbish. They're crap. They can't even move. You know, the reason why they have to be on top is not because of dominating or stuff, because they die, because they're like solar panels. They have to be near to the sun, yeah? They don't do anything. And they don't even have teeth. They've got like slightly serrated Jaws, you know? Like those spoons that you put the tea in. I'm English, so you get these funny spoons, looks like a knight's helmet. You put the tea in like that, and it kind of, you make it open and close like that. They're like that. They're crap. And you know, Attenborough is always showing them like the amazing survival tactic of the lizard, and you just see this lizard just falls over on its back. That's not a survival tactic. That's just falling over and happening not to be eaten. And then you can have sex and have kids, and so that's adaptation, folks. That's the survival of the fittest. It doesn't mean having 6-pack abs, thank God, right? Because I have like a 1-pack, like I have a half-pack, right? But like, it means survival of not, you know, you didn't die before you had kids, which is pretty much a good rule in order to have kids. Yeah, it's really cheap, you know. All these, funnily enough, see, the trouble is social Darwinism came before Darwinism, because it took him a while to write the book. And they all forced him to put this phrase in because they were paranoid about how non-teleological it was. So it's kind of got it wrong for everybody. Lizards, what are they? Lizards are just like, you know, tadpoles that didn't drown or, suffocate when the pond or the puddle evaporated. You know, like that whole tail falling off thing. That's not a clever thing. That's just a stupid tadpole thing. You know, they don't do anything. I think what's really cool about it, though, is that my lizard can hypnotize my cat. That's a crazy defense mechanism by the simple expediency of doing nothing. He just sits there, and he sits in front of a rock. All lizards have a slight chameleon power, yeah? So he just sort of sits there, and the cat looks at him like, is there an animal there? Focus, unfocus, focus, boom, falls asleep. It's awesome. But it isn't. It's just rubbish. He just sits there, you know? Let's think about that fish for a bit. You know, the fish that can breathe out of water because it has air in its swim bladder. It's a fish, but it isn't a fish. It's not a fish in form or telos, not completely anyway. It can breathe out of water for 5 seconds. It's a mutant fish. It's an X-fish, you know, X, like the X-Men, X-fish, if you like. All fish are mutant X-fish because all DNA is mutated without respect to current need. It just does that. In general, at least for life forms, existing as such is necessarily X-existence. Mary Wollstonecraft should have said, look what a fine X-morning it is, because time is also like that, don't get me started. X-insects, X-birds, and X-animals are all enjoying X-existence. Humans, like moments and birds and insects and animals, are haunted by their X-ness as a condition of possibility for existing at all. To be a life form is to be spectral. The concept nature is precisely a way to delete this necessary spectrality in more than just thought alone, because look at walls between cities and what's outside them to make a point about Mesopotamia that's also about the current president of the USA. Luckily, cats don't care about these walls and pop in to eat the rats that ate the corn in the house that Jack built. This is sort of the English nursery rhyme, yeah? Which happily is an X-house, a haunted house, not a proper self-contained house that doesn't need anything else. Economics is also X-economics, and ecology must always be X-ecology. The ecological thought is the wish to be haunted. The ghostly spectrality of ecology can't be located in a body like a gas in a bottle or a soul, nor can it be located only outside a body like a machine, nor can it be located in some special in-between place that is neither. See, this is pretty much the OOO definition of object. I'm one of these OOO people, this object-oriented ontology thing, and this is pretty much it. And I didn't know anything about it. And then one of them did this blog post about 9 years ago and said, Tim Morton's idea of strange stranger, which is this, that's what I was calling it at that time, like, what do you call life forms, yeah? They said, that's just the object, that's just an OOO object. I was like, oh, wow, I am one of these people. Good Lord. We really should have called it de-objectification-oriented ontology, but we ran out of ink. Object doesn't mean despite or versus a subject here. And like, it's just a stupid word. You know, like, just use the word entity. If it's pissing you off, this word object, just say entity-oriented ontology. It's fine. An object doesn't mean everything is a machine or everything is definitely a subject being defined again by its ability to treat everything else as a blank screen onto which its desires are projected, which sort of sounds a bit sadistic, right? So like the main default choice in like European philosophy is between lumps of blur decorated with accidents and these, which is the Aristotle thing, and then like the vanilla modern version, which is like blank screens for desire projection purposes, you know. It's not a potato until you've grown it and eaten it and sold it and all that stuff, yeah? Anyway, Kant, being an up-to-date post-Humean, which is almost a pun, thinker, he asserts that we never get the thing in itself, we get data. We get measurements more precisely and tastes and smells and stuff, as in Pink Floyd's song Breathe. I sometimes think that when I teach this to undergrads, I say that David Hume reincarnated as Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, because he says here, all you touch and all you see is all your life will ever be. There's a radical cut between the real and reality, to put it in Lacanian. Luckily for anthropocentric Kant, it just so happens that one of the ways we access data, aka measurement, gets at the thing in the way that smelling or tasting or writing a poem about doesn't. He doesn't prove this. In fact, the example he uses, like all examples in general, runs away from him, because when he describes raindrops that keep falling on your head, even the fact that they are yay large and falling at yay velocity is just data, not the raindrops themselves, and not different from other data, not really, which implies that the brutalist smell of wet concrete is just as good or bad data. So that smelling is just as good or bad as measuring. You know, there's this whole kind of I see thing going on in our world as opposed to I touch or whatever, and it's just whack, isn't it? So that my cat, who smells things for sure, is just as good or bad at accessing raindrops as me. There's no top-level access mode, which means the gap between real and reality can't only be located in one place in the universe, between calculating or computing beings, probably just humans, or to be Star Trek about it, humans in disguise, and everything else. Black holes, fridges, and avocados in fridges also have a radical cut between them and everything else, including themselves. If an avocado went on a chat show to talk about itself, what the audience would get would be avocado autobiography, not an avocado as such. You know, like the avocado would be like, I came to consciousness in a talk by Tim Morton. It was very traumatic for me being used as an example of object withdrawal. I'm still really triggered when I hear that word. When I measure the avocado, I get avocado measurements. See, Kant doesn't have the courage to say this explicitly, so he basically remains wedded to the Cartesian dualism, despite saying he's transcended all that bad ontological stuff, pretending to be philosophy in his lovely Copernican turn. Because what makes things real, unquote, realizing or interpreting them the way a conductor, an orchestra, an audience, and cultures of music realize a Beethoven symphony, turns out for him officially to be subjects measuring objects. And like, the trouble is, when you take this out, you know, when you take this stuff out, and like smelling and touching things is just as good as thinking, you end up sounding like Yoda, you know, because like Kant got a lot of his stuff from Mesmer, you know, Mr. Animal Magnetism. Like, it's the reason why it's true, because you can tell that he's right, he argues, because of the beauty experience, and the beauty experience is basically like a slightly censored version of animal magnetism. You're basically having a mind meld with a painting, and who knows who started it. So you're treating the painting like it's alive, or maybe the painting's treating you like it's alive. So it charmed you, so it's exerting a kind of weird magnetic field, you know, psychically. And so like very quickly you find yourself becoming, you know, like the Star Wars. Why is it even popular? Why do we even spend billions of dollars like watching and making films about telekinesis? Why is that? He asked provocatively. Then Hegel makes this unforced error much worse by saying the real versus reality gap is just an idea happening on the inside of a subject. So poof, the problem goes away, because whatever exists is whatever the decider subject determines to exist, and you don't inhabit this country I've just discovered because you don't have a concept of country, so now I'm in charge. So like, You know, George Bush II, when he was invading Iraq, his reasoning was, I'm the decider. I get to decide whatever's true. And after they'd done it, the most frightening, still the most frightening to me, despite the recent past press conference ever from the White House, was one of the spokespeople there. And they said, well, basically, we create realities. And your job is to study them, which is great. And then by the time you finish studying them, we will have created another reality for you to study. It's really chilling. So no, I firmly believe that reality is haunted by its realness. You know, in the same way that a sentence is haunted by its meaning, right? Or this lecture is haunted by the end of this lecture, which might never arrive. But there is, in fact, it's finite. Everything's finite, yeah? Just trust me. Which is another way of saying the appearance of a thing is haunted by what it is, the being of a thing. Which is another way of saying that the past is haunted by the future since, and this is too long an argument to make here, time is nowhere else but in the slippage within beings between appearing and being, between access, aka causality, and what things are. The being part of that phrase, species being, is now really significant, not just a throwaway term. So, for example, solidarity, you know, is a way of being, right? It's not just a sort of choice, it's a way of being. It's how the things called life forms appear because they depend on other life forms, including past ones, for their existence. What we're talking about is the phenomenology of symbiosis, the noise it makes. What is reified as nature is in fact what I now call the symbiotic real. I finally came up with a phrase for it that I like, because I wrote this book called Ecology Without Nature, and you wouldn't believe in the USA, so many, like I actually got like death threats and stuff, like people really stalking me and for saying that, because they thought I meant that dolphins don't exist, but I'm actually saying they really do exist. Just stop putting them on this weird pedestal. The interesting thing about species being is that it has at least part of one foot in the symbiotic real. Symbiosis fundamentally is like thinking, did I just swallow poison? So, okay, so imagine, you know, even somebody really, really utilitarian like Richard Dawkins had to agree in the end that symbiosis was good. You know, like Lynn Margulis' idea. And the hardcore symbiosis idea is called endosymbiosis, namely beings that attach themselves to you permanently and become part of you, or do you become part of them, right? So imagine there's a single-celled organism and it's kind of flopping around in the ocean. You know, then suddenly, boom, oh, shit, did I just swallow poison? Am I going to die? 3 million years later, oh no, I didn't. It was a bacteria and it's now become an energy cell and I'm an animal, hooray, right? Only with 20/20 hindsight you realize you didn't swallow poison. So the phenomenology of it, like the feel of it, is like this uncertainty as to what you let into yourself, yeah? It's a foundational question of uncertainty about what just entered you. The personhood of another being haunts their supposedly machinic functioning. A parasite can be necessary, supplementing existence with an X that feeds off of it and supplies it with equipment. So, you know, my uncle used to be a research biologist, biochemist, and he used to research the placenta all the time. So in London, yeah, and he was getting all these phone calls at 4 a.m, the St. Thomas's Hospital. We've got another placenta. He was, oh, great. You drive quickly to the hospital. And the placenta is really smooth. Yeah, funnily enough, it looks like a hugely magnified image of the protein coat of a virus. And that's because it is, right? Like in the same way as this tree trunk in my garden in California. It was from a freshly cut tree, and soon fungus grew all over the pink-yellow surface of the cut wood. Eventually, what remained was, as it were, a translation of the trunk into mushroom-ese, a mushroom in the key of trunk. The placenta is an expression of a retrovirus, a slightly broken symbiont version of a virus in our DNA called ERV3. So at some point there was this virus. Then human beings got over it, then it attached itself to our DNA, and now it's called ERV3, like this broken bit. You know, like a microphone is a broken amplifier, You know, it's like these two little wires that broke, and suddenly the amplifier can do something else, right? Instead of just being a loudspeaker. The smoothness means that the placenta doesn't let in toxins or pathogens that much, some of which are created by the mother's host body in order to reject the obviously parasitic fetus inside of it. So, you know, this whole idea that it's a nice thing is a bit wrong. It's more like this weird, uneasy face-off, right? Like anybody who's had morning sickness knows, like it's this, you know, it's a kind of, the entity in there is trying to suck all the life, and the other entity is trying to get rid of it, quite rightly. So you're sitting here because a virus in your mum's DNA prevented her from spontaneously aborting you. Again, the paranoia. Are you my friend or are you my enemy? Being my friend means you might be my worst enemy in disguise. You know, like if you've ever had a partner and you wake up next to them, you're like, how the fuck are they even still here? You know, it gets weirder the more it goes on, you know. You know, is this person going to be toxic for me, or are they going to be okay? You know, it's like the human being version of, did I just swallow poison? What this implies is that a whole is not something that can swallow its parts, like Pac-Man. You can't digest your parts completely. Those parts might be poison. Parts require all kinds of viral surfaces for the host to tolerate them. And this means that the whole is always weirdly less than the sum of its parts. You know how we always like to say, oh yes, the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts, and everyone says it like, you know, to look clever to themselves and stuff, but what does it even mean? And then when I say it's less, everyone goes, what the fuck? But think about it this way. If everything exists in the same way, right, which I believe that's true, to exist means to exist in the same way as other things, right? So think about a soccer team, yeah? The soccer team is real. Let's pretend it's real. Like, I'm not the object police, I can't tell you, but let's just say it's real. And there's one team, and there's 11 players. They exist in the same way, so therefore the whole, which is the team, is 1. The parts are 11. Therefore, in a very lovely, stupid, simplistic way, which I like, because I'm a bit simplistic, the whole is always less than the sum of its parts. And when I say it to people, they just go, woo. People just go, delete. You know, it's really interesting. You can totally point the finger at the right people while remaining aware of yourself as part of the geophysical force called humankind. That's part of the reason why this is good. One other reason is ecological entities like forests or meadows are wholes that are made up of things that aren't them. And there's lots of them. So they're wholes that are made up of things that are greater than them, right? And according to normal Western logic, if you take things out of a pile of things, and you can still keep asking the question, is this a pile of things? Yes. Pile of things, yes. Pile of things, yes. And you can take out all of it and go, pile of things, yes. So therefore, logic says that thing doesn't really exist. So therefore you can go, oh, great, let's build a parking lot on top of it, because it didn't really exist, right? So if you want biological beings and ecological beings to exist, you have to use a different kind of logic. And luckily, there is a different kind of logic. And also, luckily, this part of logic, Aristotle logic, called the law of the excluded middle, which is like the cousin of the law of non-contradiction, it's never been proved. You have to use it to prove it. So you can't prove it. You can just assert it. So that's also cool. The whole doesn't dissolve the part. You can distinguish between guilt. Those people did it. Like I work at Rice University in Houston, and I literally work opposite the people who knew that global warming was real for 50 years. Like the cigarette company people knowing cancer was real. You know, they're there. They're the guilty, yeah? Should be arrested and go to prison. And responsibility. I can understand it, so I'm responsible for it. I don't have to prove that I did it. And as one person, I totally didn't do it to destroy the biosphere. So, you know, like, I love responsibility because it's scalable. You can be responsible as a group or as a one person or as 20,000 people, whatever. And it only requires understanding something. You don't even have to believe that you did it, right? Like, you can think jellyfish caused global warming, and you're still responsible for it because you can understand it. Right? Like, that's awesome. So you don't have to make people feel guilty. So people like me, who end up making people like you feeling stupid and evil all the time, That's just a big old waste of time, isn't it? Also, when you start your car, you're actually not doing anything to the biosphere. That's statistically meaningless. Billions of those things are. That's the weird paradox, right? Like, as an individual person, you're not guilty. You are not guilty. That's like my main message, you're not guilty. The other message is we are the asteroid, but the second one is you're not guilty. The supposed godlike qualities of human alienated superpowers are precisely the aesthetic form their alienation takes. They are more like what Raven and Magneto can do, which in our case is to be chameleons who can take on the colors of the surfaces on which we find ourselves, just like anyone can end up flying the Millennium Falcon. In a fantasy version of all my lectures, all I'm doing is talking about Muppet Show and Star Wars, so I have to slightly put them in. Destiny is always a reification, harmful even to the being that is conjuring it. We live in a magical world where contingency is hardwired into causality. Something happens to you. You just find this garbage, or you get given something. Maybe you win it. There is no teleology. That's why the Millennium Falcon is the most interesting thing. Rather than Pac-Man, it's this amalgam of modified bits and pieces making up something that, when traveling in hyperspace, is a living room, right? Like Star Wars is like Millennium Falcon. It's basically a living room, where you get to sit in a fake leather swivel chair, and then you can talk quiet and sexy and play a game of chess. You just find yourself in it with this Wookiee and this droid. The hole that you're in is less than the sum of its parts. Your mitochondria better have their own DNA. They wouldn't be much use as energy cells otherwise. What we are alienated from is not some identifiable formal or teleological essence, aka the past. Like a lot of people like me also sound like primitivists, like, if only we could get back to what before the fall of humans and, What we're alienated from is the future, aka the possibility that things might be different. We're not alienated from some primordial Edenic state that somehow got spoiled. How could it have been if it was perfect? So, and in every other previous society, I've been executed by now for the things I do and the ideas in my head. So, I'm not trying to go back to the past. So, to get a bit technical for a minute, if you're interested in ideology theory, there's two competing theories, one of which is it's like alienation from some essence, or it's or that very idea is the ultimate ideology, right? And that is the argument between Althusser, the French guy, and the non-Althusser people. So the non-Althuserian theory of alienation is right, but for the wrong reasons. We are alienated, but not from the past, but from the future. And likewise, the Althusserian theory, via Lacan, by way of Hegel, by way of anthropocentric Kant, is wrong, but for the right reasons. It's all ideology everywhere, but this is a symptom of a withdrawn yet totally effective reality. The paranoia is precisely because the ideology doesn't line up with what things really are. But what things really are is their future, not their past. We are alienated from the future, which sounds really obvious when you think about it. Like, what's wrong with automation? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it isn't artificial intelligence, because, I might be an android, I don't even know, But what's wrong with it is the past is eating the future. Like Fantasia, the movie with Mickey Mouse in it, and he's got these brooms, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and he gets one broom to sweep up, and then he thinks, oh, maybe I'll have another one. And he's just like building the past out further. That's excluding the possibility that things can be different in a very destructive way. But now we have a rigorous, precise way of saying so and a way of doing something about it. The tactics can include stuff that looks just awful from a totally disgusted punk romantic point of view, but that point of view was only the top level of how to be a consumerist anyway, since how to be appropriately disgusted is how to perform good taste. So, if you're at an art opening, you're not allowed to say, and from my experience, which is I feel like I get paid to say the wrong thing in public. So it's terrible. Curb your enthusiasm. Sometimes, mostly it's accidental, And so you're not supposed to say Phil Collins in an art opening. You know, you're supposed to not, you're not supposed to be like, especially not like, oh, I really love that first Phil Collins album. His drumming is amazing. And no wonder all these hip hop artists sampled him. And, you know, you're supposed to be like, Phil Collins, you know, like maybe like one-on-one with someone at the opening, you can talk like that. But as a group, they're all going to be like, and I met this guy in France a few years ago, and he said, I love the fact that I only listen to noise music because I can't remember any of it. And I'm like, do you understand what you do? Like, if you can't remember it, how come you think you like it? Like, does that even make sense? And don't listen to that bit. The inverse approach also doesn't work, for transcending the consumer space is how ideology renders capitalist economics. The I really am an object in that bad way sort of Andy Warhol approach is just a pose. I'm pretty sure Andy doesn't really actually want to be bought and sold, which must mean that the right approach is a middle path approach, a weird, hesitating, oscillating fusion of enjoyment and disgust, otherwise known as ennui. What I love about it is we've discovered the chemical. In the 1860s, Baudelaire discovered it. It's called ennui, which turns out to be exactly the phenomenology of being a scientist. This sea lion mother is loving on you, the biologist, which is making you cry. I heard this on the radio a few months ago. But she's doing so by throwing dead penguins at you, which is really nasty because you're a human. I'm covered in vampires and bacterial micro stuff, and I sort of enjoy that, but enjoying that is pretty gross, and so on, oscillating without a resting place. You know, like those Baudelaire poems, like, I'm all covered in stuff, but it's weirdly nice. It's weirdly disgusting that I like it, but it's weirdly nice that it's weirdly disgusting that it's weirdly nice, but it's weirdly nice. Hospitality to non-humans means just this fusion, the chemical formula for which Baudelaire discovered in the 1860s. The real exit from consumerist ideology space is to be found somewhere deeper inside of it, not via the skylight or out via the basement. And I have a funny feeling it's somewhere in between Christmas Land and Halloween Town, like in the Tim Burton movie, Nightmare Before Christmas. It's somewhere there, and like it's in the little kind of LED lights, somewhere there is the dimension gate to go through. And in a much, much longer version of this talk that I haven't ever given, the flavor of that is the Afrofuturism, is the most accurate flavor. Everybody watch Black Panther now. It's actually very important. Politics, like Symbiosis, is a matter of aesthetics. Politics is a matter of disgust, enjoyment, and ennui, and it's a matter of the beings with whom you associate and with whom you don't. Walter Benjamin describes fascism as aestheticizing politics, turning it into a work of art. And surely the whole idea of great, as in make America great again, is an aesthetic idea. You know, it's basically talking to people on Vicodin. You know, it's just like, you're going to feel great. It's going to be great. Just relax, have another Vicodin. You're going to make it great. Yeah, it's a feeling, great, yeah. But this implies something like conceding a huge point to fascism. The assumption that Benjamin makes is that the political is like an Aristotelian substance or Cartesian extension, or maybe even Kantian blank screen. Fascism provides a way to make it colorful. But of course, that's just one way of making it colorful. It's already colorful. It just is colors all the way down. So really, fascism is about gilding the lily, as they say, assuming that there is a right way to enjoy the bland lumps of political clay or bread lying around. Thinking the way we've been thinking, that all politics is aesthetic, no matter what Benjamin says, allows us to see the flaw in fascist politics in another way and turns the political into an intrinsically colorful adventure. Putting the ecology back in economy results in a vision of the political that is profoundly based on symbiosis, a vision that is deeply and urgently aesthetic. Thank you very much. And so I'm obviously super happy to take questions. And how long do we have? Have I motor-mouthed? I'm a
Друзья,
motor-mouth.
если у вас будут вопросы, поднимите, пожалуйста, руку, мы передадим микрофон.
Hello, team. Thank you for the lecture.
It's a pleasure.
I will talk in English, supposedly
Cool.
to have a direct contact. I will refer to the famous article by Bruno Latour, where he actually showed a repentance that the ideas of relativity of all the truth, he actually mentioned in previous works, as well as in a lot of speculative philosophy, leads to the era of post-truth, that it was actually taken by the wrong political forces.
Right on.
How do you personally treat your own work in contribution to that problem?
Right on. Oh, wow. Everybody always says that was a beautiful question, but that really was a beautiful question. And maybe the fact that I might be just pretending or saying something that's a slight lie could be part of this. Because unfortunately, folks, okay, so Tim Morton's basic fake news detector, yeah? It might not work for everything, but it's pretty crude, but it works, yeah? So fake news wants you to believe that true and false are really different, right? Like fake news is like, this is true! Otherwise it wouldn't be compelling, you wouldn't want to retweet it or whatever, yeah? News has some ambiguity in it. Because funnily enough, ambiguity is an accuracy signal. You know, like you're at the eye doctor, and the eye doctor always gets it down to this kind of, is it number 1 or is it number 2? Is it number 1 or number, and you're like, well, I can't tell the difference. Like number 1 is good and number 2 is also good. You have a choice between 2 equally good things. That's ambiguity, right? Like it's very kind of precise ambiguity. It's not vague and fuzzy. And that's it, because glass is finite and doctors are finite and you're finite and optometry is finite, right? And so you get down to this ambiguous level, and what does that mean? It means you have an accurate prescription, no matter what you choose, right? So ambiguity can be an accuracy signal sometimes, right? So that's the beginning. Now the trouble is that even for Immanuel Kant, truth depends upon truthiness, this concept, this lovely word that was invented by this American comedian, Stephen Colbert, truthiness, you know? It kind of means the ring of truth, right? Because beauty literally is the ring of truth. There's a horrible word in food, PR, in America called mouthfeel. It's how they describe potato chips, right? Does this potato chip have good mouthfeel? The word mouthfeel has really bad mouthfeel. I'm just going to say that. But like, what it means is there's truth feel, right? There has to be truth feel for there to be truth, right? So true and false have to be sort of overlapping. So you might be being conned at any moment, which is a signal that you're actually in kind of truthy space, right? So, for example, to take a very strong example, I was at Avebury Ring. It's an ancient indigenous British sacred site in Britain in the summer, and it's these stone circles in this town, you know. And my daughter said something very true about it. She said, this is either very profound or it's a gigantic boob joke because of the way the stones are arranged. And it's like you can't tell the difference, and like there's this non-patriarchal overlap between true and false, right? Whereas Stonehenge, have you ever seen Spinal Tap? It's got this thing about Stonehenge in it. It's this colossal, sizest monument that's definitely, starkly not about true and false overlapping. It's about, we've got the most accurate clock in the world. You know, even a stopped stone circle is right twice a year, as it were. And so, you know, so we should be in charge because we've got the most accurate measuring device, you know. So somewhere between Avebury and Stonehenge, patriarchy started, right? And this strong distinction between true and false, which is why fake news can have a grip, because we're not used to the idea that true and false overlap. So therefore, when someone comes along to manipulate and use that and do the fake news, everyone's very surprised by it, and it's like, wow, we got to get back to this true-false distinction. But that's what's upsetting about the fake news, right? What would be a much more good antidote to fake news would be like, oh, sure, true and false are overlapping, fine. Just do better PR, you know, because in a way, 1 + 1 = 2 is also PR, you know? Like, mathematicians are like, oh, that's so beautiful when they look at an equation, because and that's why it's true for them. It's beautiful, right? It has truth feel. Beauty is why Kant is correct from his point of view. It's why you can have this transcendental subject stuff, right? And so this is really important to think about, like working with this aesthetic dimension and not just giving it away to people that you don't agree with, but just like using it yourself. And in America, the left is very preoccupied with being very puritanical and so, how dare you, whereas the right wing is like, we know how to enjoy capitalism. It's about huge turkey drumsticks and cars that emit lots of fossil fuels and all that, right? And it's like, well, can't you have a left-wing way of enjoying yourself that's more inclusive? Like, how come when people started trying to get rid of racism and misogyny, the whole idea of being in a club also kind of disappear? Like the sort of boys' club thing where Winston Churchill and Roosevelt can hang out with each other and do jokes and stuff. Like, how come the democracy works? Because there's like a club like that they can go to. How come you can't have a club where people can be chummy, unquote, in a way that is anti-racist or anti-misogynistic, right? So how come you can't have pleasure, but like a sort of left-wing version of it? I'm very against this sort of Adorno idea of pleasure is in the future, you can't have it now. Because unfortunately, that's a way of having pleasure, right? Like, I'm so much more pure than you. I'm denying myself. It's much nicer, right? Helping? Probably not. Yeah.
Hey.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah. Hello.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. Oh, I'm sorry. Who's the first one?
Huh?
Let's just decide. I'm just like on the edge. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so first of all, I need to apologize because my question will be quite long, I would say. So I need to start with the thing that once I just opened the book called Hyperobjects, and we needed to prepare like a presentation about it, and I spent like 4 days non-stop reading it and discussing and just screaming. And in the end, like just something hit us really hardly. And now I'm here and I can actually find like the link to each book of yours while you were speaking. So I'm like really glad that I'm here. And the thing I wanted to say is, this is so fascinating that the method you use, this like sensual method, can I call it like this? It just basically reinvents pre-Socratic philosophy. And when I came back to Moscow from my studies, I decided to write a paper about Marxism being anthropocentric and ignoring all the like being speciesist, yeah. And I wrote this paper. I was like super happy. I handed it to like my analytical philosophy class, and I got like the highest grade. But then I came back to my classes here, and my tutor pointed out one really important thing about Marx himself, and that's why I wanted to ask this question right now and right here.
Sure.
He showed me the link to economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, the part private property and communism, and which makes Marx actually a really nice guy. So, like, I mean, yeah, there's like a big problem about Marxists just getting like down and down and like becoming more and more anthropocentric. But I just feel like that it's important to notice that Marx himself was like actually really aware.
Copy that.
Yeah, yeah, and also I really want to request for new Twin Peaks stuff you wrote on your blog. This is really cool.
Right on. Oh gosh, thank you so. Wow, I'm very touched by what you said, and also it's funny because that thing that happened to you happened to me about this hyperobject thing first. Like it just was intense. And I also wrote the book very quickly. Like I did all these like lectures about it, and then I put all my notes away and I just wrote it in 15 days, 6-hour days in the student cafe place in my university. And so it's got this feeling to it, And yeah, the thing is, if you take the bit on species being, and luckily the English translation has got one page and another page, and one page is the good bit, and the other page is the not good bit. And the good bit, for me, there's lots of good bits, like you said, but the good bit for me is your body is like, the biosphere is an extension of your body, right? And like, so it's also an extension of the butterfly's body. So you're an extension of the butterfly's body, right? That's wow. And you know, like normal capitalist economics calls those things like butterflies externals, right? Like it can't even think about them. This at least can think about it a little bit, right? Like even a tiny bit is better, right? And then the next page is the not so great bit, which is that things get realized by being put into human economic sort of relations to each other, right? So, you know, you grow the potato and you sell it and you eat it, and that's what a potato is, right? And so like, half of it is amazing, and the other half of it, you can kind of let go of it. And that other half is the Hegel bit. And I actually feel like, just take the Hegel bit out. You know, it doesn't actually need to be, this is a bit provocative maybe for some people, but it doesn't actually need to be in there. And, or maybe just the little tiny bit of it needs to be in there, but not the big picture bit needs to be in there. And then, as long as you're okay with sounding a bit like Yoda and talking about the force all the time, because very quite quickly you go to this place where you have to say these weird things, because then you end up saying causality is aesthetic, which is very fundamentally just a normal modern science thing to say, just slightly translated. And you start sounding a bit weird and mystical, you know, but it's much nicer to yourself and non-human beings, so who cares, right? So yeah, it's like, this is amazing, this idea that your world, your biosphere is an extension of your body. That's just amazing. Because there's no good reason why you're not an extension of a whale's body as well. And, you know, when you say about the blog, you're quite right. I actually should do more on this blog. I sort of stopped doing it for a while. And I feel like putting much more stuff in it all of a sudden and sharing. I'm very into sharing my stuff. And I'm in this phase of my career where I'm like, I'd like to collaborate with people a lot more. And so actually, funnily enough, I'm writing this book. I'm writing the sequel to Hyperobjects. It's called Hyposubjects. And I've just dissed the whole word subject a lot. And that's the fun thing about it. I'm writing it with this Hegelian Marxist guy. And part of it is, we can totally get along with each other to help people. It's fine. Like this whole kind of narcissistic chewing off of your arm that we do when on the left-wing side of things is really unnecessary and unpleasant. And just get along with each other. And so we've written this book like hyper-object, hypo-subject, right? Like the hyper-subject is like the thing that's the bad thing, and like how to become a bit more, and the subtitle is On Becoming Human. And it's going to be a free PDF, you can download it. And we wrote it in this Virginia Woolf way, so we interviewed each other, and so it says I this and I that, but you can't tell who says what. And so in one paragraph, it says, I like X, and then the next sentence is, I like not X. Yeah, and it's just got this strange thing. And then we invented this rule, which is that 5 years from now, 2 other people have to rewrite it completely. Yeah, and we're going to make it be in the contract. So 2 of you can get together and rewrite hyposubjects. It's going to be like a video game in the form of a book for creating these hyposubject things, you know. Most of it is just like white guys realizing that they're just the same as everybody else on the planet because they're just as equally oppressed by stuff. It's a bit embarrassing. So like suddenly realizing that there are these issues facing us that everybody else freaking knows already, you know? Thank you.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
And I've got a question about the relations between liberalism and dark ecology, because don't they, when we talk about dark ecology, we have all the discourse that the individual guilt is not effective, that we should not blame ourselves, that we can't do anything on own, and doesn't it contradict the main liberal discourse? Because your books show us that you can't really do anything with ecology if you want to begin with yourself.
Wow. Yeah, right on. So like, okay. So it's funny because lots of people who critique what you're calling liberalism, it's a complicated word, and I'm just going to assume that I know what it means, which is really dumb. I'm just going to assume I know. But like, say the films of Adam Curtis, he makes these documentaries about like, you know, the me generation and the meditation people and the crystal people were getting it wrong because they were about individually orientating themselves. And as a meditatee crystal person who's quite happy to be interested in narcissism, I feel like the problem in our world is not the narcissism, it's the narcissistic disorder, right? It's when you have a gap in the nice feedback loop to yourself and you realize that someone else has a bit more nice circulation, so you get really cross with them, you want to get rid of them. You know, it's that's the problem, is the disordered narcissism. And like, how can you even be nice to other people until you know how to be nice to yourself? Because in a way, like Rambo says, I is another. You know, so like in monasteries, sometimes in Tibet, when I went there, they basically said like, teaching people generosity, you start with a ball, it's just like to 7-year-old girls and boys, right? So you have a ball in your hand, and then you give it the ball to the other hand, right? And then that hand gives the ball to the other hand, right? Like 15 years later, you're ready to die for other people, but you started off by giving a ball to yourself, right? And so kind of like individual isn't quite it anyway, you know, not because I'm a machine made of components, but because I never quite coincide with myself at every point. And so in a funny way, the liberal or neoliberal or whatever is not individualism enough, right? Because enough individualism would mean allowing all the parts of you to have the most amount of pleasure, like, oh, my arm, like I've got stiff arm right now, like sciatica. You know, whenever I pick up a weight with this arm, it's really stiff, and I'm like, poor arm, I know you, I'm making you pick this weight up, I'm so sorry, you know, I'm sorry for you, give you a massage. Why not, right? Why not? And so in a way, like, pleasure is always orientated towards the other, right? And then like this funny distinction some people make between pleasure and enjoyment, and pleasure is like to do with building yourself up and enjoyment is about being destroyed. Well, it's just like, no, that's not quite right. Because actually, alive means somewhere in between being completely non-existing and doing the same thing over and over and over again. Doing the same thing over and over again is what Freud calls death drive, right? And not existing at all is like when all the chemicals in here become the same as all the chemicals over there, it's called Tim is dead, right? And so actually being alive is like, as opposed to surviving, which is like the death version, you know, like the kind of cop in America right now, like I had to shoot the black person because I feared for my life, I had to survive. And I've been in survival mode for most of my life, and it sucks. And I've only just figured out that alive means different from surviving, you know, and it's like, as a whole, human societies need to figure this out, because we've been so towards the idea of surviving at the expense of other beings that now is becoming fatal to us as well. Just like how doing the same thing over and over again, you know, you end up like dying of cancer or getting really stressed or whatever, you know, having a heart attack, right? So unfortunately, like, you can't avoid the death. So life is a kind of quivering state in between two different types of death. And there's always a kind of strange otherness involved in the pleasure that one can allow to oneself and other beings. And so therefore, in some way, pleasure, like the art of pleasure, is always collective, right? It's never, even if it's just one person on their little lonesome making themselves a fried egg, right? Because there's an egg and there's the frying pan and there's the person with the mouth and the stomach and all the evolution bits, right? And so in a funny way, it's like the problem with neoliberalism is not that it's individualism, it's not enough individualism. You know, like there's another way of thinking about it. Like there's this great Oscar Wilde essay called The Soul of Man Under Socialism. And he's like, if it was real, if it really was in effect properly, it would be like you could sculpt your life exactly how you wanted. It would be like a completely aestheticism, because there'd be nothing to restrain you from doing it. And so it would be better individualism than it is now, in a way. And so that would be my response to that. And I don't know whether I've completely answered what you said, but that would be how I would respond to that.
Должны же вы получить хотя бы один вопрос по-русски.
I think that you should get at least one question in Russian with translation. So, you finished your beautiful talk with the quotation from Walter Benjamin about fascism being the aestheticization of politics. This is the final sentence in Benjamin's book, but your quotation was incomplete, I believe, because he also had words like communism, responses to it by the politicization of art. Response to it by politicization of art. Now we are in the city and the country, which was the venue for the realization of one half of this sentence, the second half. I don't mean aesthetics here as such. I rather mean the fact that after all of these philosophical ideas, what emerged were communities that led to different processes, which led to disastrous results. Hundreds of millions of perished people, dead people. This is the actual result of this idea. So it seems like the philosophical idea can be a reason for such a disaster when people perish, when they die. So it seems like we people are different from animals in this aspect exactly. Animals can hypnotize each other from love or eat each other when they're hungry, but they're not going to exterminate a population of their own kind just for ideological reasons. So from this point of view, after I've listened to you, and you were saying that humans can be the reason for a huge ecological catastrophe, for a huge disaster, maybe not one human, but hundreds of millions for sure, or a few billion people, that's for sure. If I build on that idea of yours, can we say that the philosophy is a bacteria in the body of the humankind, which will help the humankind avoid the ecological catastrophe?
Wow. Okay. Gosh, thank you. Wow. Okay, so I'd like to talk about this from the point of view of a depression sufferer. I suffer from very serious depression. I'm very out about it. I have a psychiatrist and I have a therapist. I've been in therapy for 22 years. And I feel like part of my job is to be a little bit out about it, because it's sort of like some people think about being clever as like the Olympics, drug-assisted is bad, right? But there's drugs in here and there's drugs over there. And you had like cannabinoid receptors in your brain before cannabis evolved. Do you know what I'm saying? And so like, I feel like being a little bit out about it. And I do feel like, so I had this horrible nightmare. When I went through a whole year of not taking the medication. It was because I had a bad doctor. And I went further and further down into the depression. And I actually destroyed 5 versions of Dark Ecology. Which is very unusual for me. I'm usually Mr. Verbal Diarrhea, I don't care. And I was just throwing it away. And I got to this point at the end of the year when I was having suicidal ideation, is what they call it technically, every 5 minutes, and I couldn't think more than about 5 minutes into the future or 5 minutes into the past. And funnily enough, that's like what you say animal could be. Maybe it's more on a linear scale for me. So like, why does my cat get so scared? Because he can't project into the future as much as me. Like I'm hurting now, but this will be over in 10 minutes. Isn't something that can occur to him, yeah? But anyway, I was in a bad way, and I was very confident. I was like, I can tell the difference between my mind and my brain. I'm an intelligent person. But no, actually, you can't. Like hormones get everywhere. They're really, really effective. And so I started to recover from it, and I had this really terrible nightmare. And in my nightmare, I was having there was this banquet in Venice, of all places, right? And there was this very, very smart more handsome, slightly darker hair version, slightly taller version of me sitting next to me in this bank who's like, I love your stuff. I really fucking, it's amazing. I love it. And 10 minutes later, he's like, I just have a little question about this one thing that you talk about, blah, 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 blah. And then the dream upgraded, and there was the same banquet, the same guy was like, this final paragraph of your book isn't very good. I think you should change it, and blah, blah, blah. Then it upgraded, this chapter is bad. Then it upgraded, this is a very bad book, and you shouldn't have written it. It finally went to this point of, you should throw yourself in the canal now, because you're an inadequate being. And luckily it was a lucid dream, so I was like, I'm so sorry, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that to myself. And then I woke up, I said, fuck, I just met my depression self in a dream. It was so scary, because he was smarter than me, more handsome than me, better at talking than me, like more charismatic than me, like everything better. And so I started thinking, actually, the intellect is like literally bacteria in a way, spot on, because the intellect is like the white blood cells, right? Like the white blood cells are going around looking for anomalies in your body. And if you have an allergy, sometimes you can start to attack yourself, right? And sometimes the attack can get so intense it goes into the anaphylactic shock where you die. And in a way, depression is the same thing, right? Your depression mind is this ultimately logical entity. It's looking for anomalies. And what could be a more anomalous thing than this being that evolved from millions and billions of years of evolution with like fish bits and little things crawling around? It's just this mess. And all these different bits of brain from different animals and stuff. And the intellect that arose out of the host being suddenly becoming a parasite. And with the logical consequence of suicide, which is the kind of depression equivalent of anaphylactic shock, right? And so within intellect, there's always the possibility of extremely destructive aggression, right? And so one of the most destructive things you can do is to distinguish between things too strongly, right? And so actually, funnily enough, the reason why philosophy could be good is if it realizes that it could be incredibly violent. At any moment, it could break out into the most incredibly self-destructive, other-destructive violence, right? And that's how it could maybe my job is like it's not being right. Yeah, maybe my job is like making homeopathic medicine for the intellect to kind of soothe the allergic reaction of the intellect to the host organism, which is also the biosphere, right? Like it's not, I just didn't come out of myself. Like the sort of patriarchal idea that I popped out of myself, I didn't, I came out of a vagina. I don't know how many times you can say that without being, like a bloke in a bad way. Probably just once, I'll just say it once and stop. So like, my job should be making like allergy medicine so that you can tolerate being an embodied being, so you don't like try to extricate yourself, because trying to extricate yourself is like, it results in this problem that we have, right? When you see one person trying to extricate themselves like that, only to find themselves doubling down, it's called a tragedy, right? Like Oedipus is like, oh my God, I'm going to kill my dad and marry my mum, so I have to escape from this terrible fate. And in the very attempt to escape becomes the fate, right? When you see one person doing that, it's called a tragedy. And there's a lot of intellectual philosophy stuff about the tragedy of life and blah, blah, blah. When you see 10 people doing it, it's called Monty Python's Flying Circus, right? So tragedy is just a twisted part of comedy space. So me being an ecology guy shouldn't be talking to you in tragedy mode. It's like how to find the comedy, because in a way, comedy is the equivalent of a nice, healthy habitat, right? Like all the emotions are in comedy, sadness and joy and terror and fear and panic and love and hope, and everything's in there, but the emotions aren't deleting each other. They're just kind of like nicely, semi-peacefully coexisting. But there's always in comedy the threat that it could be violent, which is why it's compelling and interesting to watch it, right? And so I feel like instead of saying there's good philosophy and then there's bad philosophy, which would be, in a way, like that would be my depression self talking, I'm probably going to say, I'm so sorry, depression self, I'm going to give you a big old hug, because actually you're me.
Дорогие друзья, к сожалению, у нас
Dear ladies
немножечко
and
уже
gentlemen,
поджимает время. Я
unfortunately,
сейчас
we don't have
передам
any
микрофон на
more
последний
time
вопрос.
left, so we will
Оставшиеся
have a
вы можете
final
задать
question
лично.
now, and then you are welcome to come up to Timothy and ask your questions face to face.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture.
Oh, gosh.
And this is the last question, and it's the irony, it's about Kant. So I would like to ask about Kant, and I would like to start with the notion of nature. As we all know, it's corrupted because it was invented by some Enlightenment philosophers. As we all know, this is, I mean, when I'm saying Enlightenment philosophers, I mean like the bunch of white guys. And if we try to speak about it in the framework of the, what he called the objectification of ontology, we have to start with re-asking the Kant's question of what is human being, because we have to include non-persons. So I'm just wondering whether you think about what the question will be, the reinterpretation of this question in terms of the objectification ontology, in terms of another ontology.
So I'm going to ask you to say the last thing again, because I not because of you, but because I didn't quite understand.
Okay.
Can you say the last
So have you ever think about the re-asking the Kant's question, because we can't ask anymore what is human being?
Right on.
We should ask another question in order to stick to the objectification ontology.
I see what you're saying. Wow, gosh. Okay, so part of me wants to be very cheap and say, first of all, let's be honest, and like I say, like we, whoever we are, we did it, right? Like we meaning not blue whales, you know, like we, whatever this is that happened, we did it, it's on us, you know. But as you say, the last time people said human species, humankind, they meant scratch the surface of any body on the planet and you will find a white or maybe transparent man right inside. And so actually, the thing about me writing books is I try to write them more and more and more, like just telling people what I actually think instead of trying to be clever. You know, there's a bit of a difference. And like people like me usually frame what we do, you know, by writing more popular books as like appealing to a wider audience. It's incredibly patronizing and condescending and could only have been invented in this medieval thing called a university, right? To me, talking to more people is obviously upper level from talking to the other kind of archbishop person who's going to give you the rubber stamp that you're right, yeah? And so I wrote this book called Humankind, and the subtitle is Solidarity with Non-Human People. And to me, that's the definition that I'm going with. That humankind means solidarity with non-human people. Whoever we are depends upon an necessarily uneasy interrelationship between us and other beings. And so human being doesn't mean there's an authentic, transparent man inside. Human being means all these non-human beings we allow to haunt us to a certain extent. Maybe there are other entities that can do it better than we can, right? But like, I feel like a lot of Western philosophy is like saying that humans are Pac-Man. They're these negation monsters and they go around like boom, 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 the whole universe, totally dissolve it, like the vacuum cleaner in Yellow Submarine. It just sucks up all the stuff in the room and then it sucks itself up, right? But what if instead we were actually more like chameleons, you know, who can to some extent take on the colors of the surfaces, the three-dimensional whatever surfaces that they're on, right? We can be affected by things. We let ourselves be touched by things and affected by things. And to that extent, doing something is not like the opposite of suffering something in a way, or being passive, right? Like this difference between perpetrator and victim, which is a big issue right now, is very important to think about, because to me, act is more like listening, you know, like I've been in a few bands, and when you're in a band, it's like you're listening to the other musician, and you're listening to your music, and you're listening to the lineage that you're in, and you're listening to what the audience is feeling. And so the whole thing is about attending to, right? So when you break an action down into like a subatomic particle of quantized action, like what are the dots, right? Like for me, everything has a specific flavor. There's no transparent anything, actually. There's no transparent guys. Because like with quantum theory, there's like red energy and blue energy and yellow energy and whatever, green energy. There's no transparent energy. It always has a frequency to it. So what's the frequency of acting? It's actually made, for me, out of little dots of appreciating. Yeah. And so if I was going to say anything, maybe for me, I want to talk about all of us, human beings, all in one go, in part just because I'm a very defiant person who likes to say the rudest possible thing that they can say. And when Verso asked me to write this book, I was like, what's the most stupid thing I can say right now? Oh, we're all the same underneath, like totally disrespect the idea of cultural difference for a minute. Because, of course, that idea can also be used for, like the Brits used it to dominate Africa for 100 years, right? So how can you say we're all the same without saying something that's really awful, right? And to me, what it means is we have the ability to attune to other beings, including the otherness of ourselves. And to me, that's a good enough definition of this thing I'm calling humankind, right? In other words, like trying to figure out who you are, trying to attune to who you are. This is the Heidegger way of saying it, right? Like trying to like figure out who am I, who is, what is this human thing? Is the human thing. It might also be the butterfly thing, right? It might also be the bottle of Pellegrino thing. I don't know, I'm not a bottle of Pellegrino. I'm not ruling it out. There might be a Pellegrino book called Pellegrino Kind that sort of says the same thing, Solidarity with non-Pellegrino people, yeah, might, yeah. So it's not saying we're fundamentally different from other life forms, but sort of just like the fact that we can allow ourselves to be a little bit, to like them and to be like them, is a really, really good sign. You're welcome.